So, Paul, welcome to Billboard.
Thank you.
It's lovely to see you again.
And you, Ted.
You're a Canadian-British writer. Your poetry has recently been published in its second edition of the New and Selected Poems.
Yeah.
Where were you from originally?
A steel-making city called Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, which has a prominent escarpment. And it was a great place to play as children. We lived very close to the escarpment. In those days, Hamilton was publicized as the steel town of Canada. Now they try to promote it as a place that has 150 waterfalls. We knew about the 150 waterfalls back then. So it was a very creative space.
Yeah.
When I was at the age of 17, I was playing with my friends on the street, and I suddenly looked up at our house, which was a detached house, and I said, I should be up there writing poetry.
Just like that?
Like that. And I went up and I began. I was influenced very much by the poetry that my grandfather recited to me when I was a boy. So I was very drawn towards the 19th century writers, especially Sir Walter Scott. These vast romantic pictures of moonscapes and heroics and damsels in distress. And I tried to write like that, and it was a complete failure because I was in 1960s, not 1860s. And you can't go back and start writing like Shelley or Keats. You can be inspired by them, but you can't go back and write like them. You have to recognize you're writing from your language and your time. I was ready to give up, and I saw this butterfly fly across in front of me on this road, and I decided to follow it. And it led me to the grave of Nawi-Bawi-Kwe. And at that point, I realized I could write about this event in a modern style. So very quickly, after being interested in Sir Walter Scott and the Romantics, I became drawn to the Germans, especially Rilke, and read him intensively. And that was another kind of voice. And I felt I could apply that voice to this experience, that this was a revelation.
And one of the other influences in your life was your father.
Oh, yes. Well, my grandfather was reciting poetry to me, but over the years, after I got over all the conflicts between my father and I began to realize he was a wordsmith. And he was always throwing out things like, don't get any conniptions. Are your cronies coming around today? You know, it's just go outside and blow the stink off you. That was one. It was endless, you know. And I think now, well, that fed in somewhere. That couldn't be ignored, you know.
So, following your upbringing in Canada, what brought you to England?
I worked as an orderly in an intensive care unit in Hamilton. And those engagements with the patients trapped in their illness inspired in me, I want to do what they can't do. And so I started to walk. So my ideal was to come to England, where my grandparents had come from, and walk from Tilbury to the north of Scotland. And I kept writing, but I had lost whatever it was that made me so inspired by the grave of Nawi-Bawi-Kwe. And it was about 15 years before I started to get it back. 2004 is the year in which I had 2 books published, married my wife, we're still married, and where I became a freelance writer.
Thank you very much for joining us on Billboard. It's been really interesting talking to you about your inspirations in your life and your writing, and we look forward to seeing more of you in the future, both in publication and in life.
Thank you very much.
You can buy Paul's collection of poetry from valleypressuk.com.